Hello there, and welcome to the Sleep Books reading tonight. Settle in, slow everything down, and let the soft rain in the background carry you deeper into the quiet. Before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you never miss a new chapter. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I always love seeing that. Now, take a breath, get comfortable, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle hum, and let's drift together into tonight's story. Charlie was waiting up for me. All the house lights were on. My mind was blank as I tried to think of a way to make him let me go, knowing this necessary goodbye was going to be painful. Edward pulled up slowly, keeping a good distance back from my truck. All three of them were acutely alert, sitting ramrod straight in their seats, listening to every sound from the wood, watching every shadow, and searching for anything out of place. The engine cut off, and we sat motionless as they continued to listen intently. Edward finally said tensely that James was not here, and that we had to go. Emmett reached over to help me out of the harness, telling me in a low but cheerful voice not to worry, because they would take care of things quickly. Moisture filled my eyes as I looked at Emmett. I barely knew him, yet the thought of not seeing him again was agonizing. I knew this was just a faint taste of the goodbyes I would have to survive in the next hour, and the thought made the tears begin to spill. Edward's voice was a command as he called to Alice and Emmett. They immediately slithered soundlessly into the darkness and instantly disappeared. Edward opened my door, took my hand, and then drew me into the protecting enclosure of his arm. He walked me swiftly toward the house, his eyes always roving through the night, warning me under his breath that I had only 15 minutes. I sniffled, saying I could do this, because my tears had unexpectedly given me an inspiration. I stopped on the porch and took hold of his face in my hands. I looked fiercely into his eyes and whispered the simple truth. I loved him, and I would always love him no matter what the next moments brought. He answered with the same intense assurance, saying nothing was going to happen to me. I told him to just follow the plan, to keep Charlie safe for me, and that even though Charlie wouldn't like me very much after this, I wanted the chance to apologize to him later. His voice was urgent as he urged me to get inside, saying we had to hurry. I whispered one more thing passionately, telling him not to listen to another word I said tonight. He was leaning in, and so all I had to do was stretch up on my toes to kiss his surprised frozen lips with as much force as I was capable of. Then I turned, kicked the door open, and ran inside, yelling for him to go away, slamming the door shut in his still shocked face. Charlie had been hovering in the living room and was instantly on his feet, calling my name. I screamed at him through my tears, which were flowing relentlessly now, telling him to leave me alone. I ran up the stairs to my room, throwing the door shut and locking it. I ran to my bed, flinging myself onto the floor to retrieve my duffel bag, then reached swiftly between the mattress and box spring to grab the knotted old sock that contained my secret cash hoard. Charlie was pounding on my door, his voice frightened as he asked if I was okay and what was going on. I shouted that I was going home, my voice breaking at the perfect spot. His tone edged toward anger as he asked if Edward had hurt me. I shrieked a few octaves higher that no, he hadn't, turning to my dresser where Edward was already waiting, silently yanking out armfuls of random clothes which he proceeded to throw to me. Charlie, perplexed, asked through the door if Edward had broken up with me. I yelled, "No," slightly more breathless as I shoved everything into the bag. Edward threw another drawer's contents at me, and the bag was now pretty much full. Charlie pounded again, shouting what had happened, and I shouted back that I had broken up with him, jerking on the zipper of my bag. Edward's capable hands pushed mine away, zipped it smoothly, and put the strap carefully over my arm. He whispered that he would be in the truck and urged me to go, pushing me toward the door before vanishing out the window. I unlocked the door and pushed past Charlie roughly, struggling with my heavy bag as I ran down the stairs. Charlie yelled, following right behind me, asking what happened and saying he thought I liked him. He caught my elbow in the kitchen, and though he was still bewildered, his grip was firm. He spun me around to look at him. and I could see in his face that he had no intention of letting me leave. I could think of only one way to escape, and it involved hurting him so much that I hated myself for even considering it. But I had no time, and I had to keep him safe. Fresh tears sprang to my eyes for what I was about to do as I glared up at my father, confessing that I did like him. That was the problem. I screamed that I couldn't do this anymore, that I couldn't put down any more roots here, and that I didn't want to end up trapped in this stupid, boring town like Mom. I shouted that I wasn't going to make the same dumb mistake she did, that I hated it, and that I couldn't stay here another minute. His hand dropped from my arm like I'd electrocuted him. I turned away from his shocked, wounded face and headed for the door. He whispered behind me, "Bells, you can't leave now. It's night time." I didn't turn around saying I would sleep in the truck if I got tired. He pleaded, still shell-shocked for me to just wait another week, saying Renee would be back by then. This completely derailed me and I gasped. "What?" Charlie continued eagerly, almost babbling with relief as I hesitated, saying she had called while I was out. He explained that things weren't going so well in Florida, and if Phil didn't get signed by the end of the week, they were going back to Arizona, where the assistant coach of the Sidewinders said they might have a spot for another shortstop. I shook my head, trying to reassemble my now confused thoughts, knowing every passing second put Charlie in more danger. I muttered, turning the knob, that I had a key. He was too close, one hand extended toward me, his face dazed. I couldn't lose any more time arguing with him, and I knew I was going to have to hurt him further. I said, "Just let me go, Charlie," repeating my mother's last words as she had walked out this same door so many years ago. I said them as angrily as I could manage, and I threw the door open, shouting, "It didn't work out, okay? I really, really hate forks." My cruel words did their job. Charlie stayed frozen on the doorstep, stunned, while I ran into the night. I was hideously frightened of the empty yard. I ran wildly for the truck, visualizing a dark shadow behind me. I threw my bag in the bed and wrenched the door open. The key was waiting in the ignition. I yelled that I would call him tomorrow, wishing more than anything that I could explain everything to him right then, but knowing I never would be able to. I gunned the engine and peeled out. Edward reached for my hand as the house and Charlie disappeared behind us. He told me to pull over. I said through the tears pouring down my cheeks that I could drive. His long hands unexpectedly gripped my waist, and his foot pushed mine off the gas pedal. He pulled me across his lap, wrenching my hands free of the wheel, and suddenly he was in the driver's seat. The truck didn't swerve an inch, and he explained I wouldn't be able to find the house. Lights flared suddenly behind us, and I stared out the back window, my eyes wide with horror. He reassured me it was just Alice, and he took my hand again. My mind was filled with the image of Charlie in the doorway, and I asked about the tracker. Edward said grimly that James had heard the end of my performance. I asked in dread if Charlie was safe. Edward said the tracker had followed us, and was running behind us now. My body went cold. I asked if we could outrun him. Edward said no, but he sped up as he spoke, and the truck's engine whined in protest. My plan suddenly didn't feel so brilliant anymore. I was staring back at Alice's headlights when the truck shuddered, and a dark shadow sprung up outside the window. My blood-curdling scream lasted a fraction of a second before Edward's hand clamped down on my mouth. He told me it was Emmett, then released my mouth and wound his arm around my waist. He promised it was okay and that I was going to be safe. We raced through the quiet town toward the North Highway. He said conversationally that he hadn't realized I was still so bored with small-town life, and he knew he was trying to distract me. He wondered if he was just flattering himself that he was making life more interesting for me. I confessed, ignoring his attempt at diversion and looking down at my knees, that I wasn't being nice, and that was the same thing my mum had said when she left him, admitting I was hitting below the belt. He smiled a little, though it didn't touch his eyes, and said not to worry because Charlie would forgive me. I stared at him desperately, and he saw the naked panic in my eyes. He said I was going to be all right. I whispered that it wouldn't be all right when I wasn't with him. He said we would be together again in a few days, tightening his arm around me, reminding me not to forget that this was my idea. I insisted it was the best idea, and of course it was mine. His answering smile was bleak and disappeared immediately. My voice caught as I asked why this had happened, and why me. He stared blackly at the road ahead, and in a low voice began by saying it was his fault, and he had been a fool to expose me like that. The rage in his voice was directed internally. I insisted that wasn't what I meant, saying I was there, big deal, and it didn't bother the other two, so why did this James decide to kill me? He hesitated, thinking before he answered, and said he had gotten a good look at James's mind tonight, and he wasn't sure if there was anything he could have done to avoid this once James saw me. He said it was partially my fault, his voice turning wry, saying if I didn't smell so appallingly luscious, James might not have bothered, but when he defended me, that had made it much worse. He explained that James wasn't used to being thwarted, no matter how insignificant the object. Edward continued with disgust that James thought of himself as a hunter and nothing else, and his existence was consumed with tracking. A challenge was all he asked of life. Edward said they had suddenly presented him with a beautiful challenge, a large clan of strong fighters all bent on protecting the one vulnerable element. He said I wouldn't believe how euphoric James was now, because it was his favourite game, and they had just made it his most exciting game ever. Edward paused a moment, saying with hopeless frustration that if he had stood by, James would have killed me right then. I said hesitantly that I thought I didn't smell the same to the others as I did to him. He confirmed that I didn't, but that didn't mean I wasn't still a temptation to every one of them. He explained that if I had appealed to the tracker, or any of them, the same way I appealed to him, it would have meant a fight right there. I shuddered. He muttered that he didn't think he had any choice but to kill James now, saying Carlyle wouldn't like it. I could hear the tyres cross the bridge, though I couldn't see the river in the dark. I knew we were getting close, and I had to ask him now how he could kill a vampire. He glanced at me with unreadable eyes, and his voice was suddenly harsh. He explained the only way to be sure was to tear James to shreds, and then burn the pieces. I asked if the other two would fight with him. He said the woman would, but he wasn't sure about Laurent, saying they didn't have a very strong bond, and he was only with them for convenience, and that he had been embarrassed by James in the meadow. I asked, my voice raw, if James and the woman would try to kill him. Edward commanded me not to dare waste time worrying about him, saying my only concern was keeping myself safe, and please, trying not to be reckless. I asked if James was still following. Edward confirmed he was, but that he wouldn't attack the house tonight. He turned off onto the invisible drive, with Alice following behind. We drove right up to the house. The lights inside were bright, but they did little to alleviate the blackness of the encroaching forest. Emmett had my door open before the truck was stopped. He pulled me out of the seat, tucked me like a football into his vast chest, and ran me through the door. We burst into the large white room, Edward and Alice at our sides. All of them were there, already on their feet at the sound of our approach. Laurent stood in their midst. I could hear low growls rumble deep in Emmett's throat as he set me down next to Edward. Edward announced that James was tracking us, glaring balefully at Laurent, whose face was unhappy as he said he was afraid of that. Alice danced to Jasper's side and whispered in his ear, her lips quivering with the speed of her silent speech. They flew up the stairs together. Rosalie watched them, then moved quickly to Emmett's side. Her beautiful eyes were intense, and when they flickered unwillingly to my face, they were furious. Carlyle asked Laurent in chilling tones what James would do. Laurent answered that he was sorry, and that he was afraid when Edward defended me, that it would set James off. Carlyle asked if he could stop James. Laurent shook his head, saying nothing stops James when he gets started. Emmett promised that they would stop him, and there was no doubt what he meant. Laurent warned that they couldn't bring him down, saying he had never seen anything like James in his 300 years, that he was absolutely lethal, and that was why Laurent had joined his coven. Laurent was shaking his head, glancing at me, perplexed and back to Carlyle. He asked if Carlyle was sure I was worth it. Edward's enraged roar filled the room, and Laurent cringed back. Carlyle looked gravely at Laurent, saying he was afraid Laurent was going to have to make a choice. Laurent understood, deliberated for a moment, his eyes taking in every face, and finally sweeping the bright room. He said he was intrigued by the life they had created here, but he wouldn't get in the middle of this. He told them he bore none of them any enmity, but he wouldn't go up against James, and that he thought he would head north to that clan in Denali. He hesitated, warning them not to underestimate James, saying he had a brilliant mind and unparalleled senses, that he was every bit as comfortable in the human world as they seemed to be, and that he wouldn't come at them head on. Laurent apologized for what had been unleashed here, truly sorry. He bowed his head, but I saw him flicker another puzzled look at me. Carlyle gave his formal answer, "Go in peace." Laurent took another long look around himself, and then he hurried out the door. The silence lasted less than a second. Carlyle looked to Edward, asking how close James was. Esme was already moving. Her hand touched an inconspicuous keypad on the wall, and with a groan, huge metal shutters began sealing up the glass wall. I gaped. Edward said James was about 3 miles out past the river, and that he was circling around to meet up with the female. Carlyle asked what the plan was. Edward's tone was deadly as he said they would lead James off, and then Jasper and Alice would run me south. Carlyle asked what then. Edward said, "As soon as Bella is clear, we hunt him." Carlyle agreed, his face grim, that he guessed there was no other choice. Edward turned to Rosalie, commanding her to get me upstairs and trade clothes. She stared back at him with livid disbelief, hissing why she should do that, and what I was to her except a menace and a danger he had chosen to inflict on all of them. I flinched back from the venom in her voice. Emmett murmured Rose, putting one hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. I was watching Edward carefully, worried about his temper and his reaction. He surprised me by looking away from Rosalie as if she hadn't spoken, as if she didn't exist. He calmly asked Esme. Esme murmured, "Of course." She was at my side in half a heartbeat, swinging me up easily into her arms, and dashing up the stairs before I could gasp in shock. I asked breathlessly what we were doing, as she set me down in a dark room somewhere off the second-story hall. She said they were trying to confuse James's smell, and that it wouldn't work for long, but it might help get me out. I could hear her clothes falling to the floor. I hesitated, saying I didn't think I would fit, but her hands were abruptly pulling my shirt over my head. I quickly stripped my jeans off myself. She handed me something that felt like a shirt, and I struggled to get my arms through the right holes. As soon as I was done, she handed me her slacks. I yanked them on, but I couldn't get my feet out because they were too long. She deftly rolled the hems a few times, so I could stand. Somehow she was already in my clothes. She pulled me back to the stairs, where Alice stood with a small leather bag in one hand. They each grabbed one of my elbows and half carried me as they flew down the stairs. It appeared that everything had been settled downstairs in our absence. Edward and Emmett were ready to leave. Emmett carrying a heavy-looking backpack over his shoulder. Carlyle was handing something small to Esme. He turned and handed Alice the same thing. It was a tiny silver cell phone. Carlyle told me that Esme and Rosalie would be taking my truck, and I nodded, glancing warily at Rosalie, who was glowering at Carlyle with a resentful expression. Carlyle said that Alice and Jasper would take the Mercedes, as they would need the dark tint in the south. They nodded as well. He added that he and Edward were taking the Jeep. I was surprised to see that Carlyle intended to go with Edward, and I realized suddenly, with a stab of fear, that they made up the hunting party. Carlyle asked Alice if they would take the bait. Everyone watched Alice as she closed her eyes and became incredibly still. Finally, her eyes opened, and her voice was certain as she said James would track them, and the woman would follow the truck, so they should be able to leave after that. Carlyle began to walk toward the kitchen, saying, "Let's go." But Edward was at my side at once. He caught me up in his iron grip, crushing me to him. He seemed unaware of his watching family as he pulled my face to his, lifting my feet off the floor. For the shortest second, his lips were icy and hard against mine. Then it was over. He set me down, still holding my face, his glorious eyes burning into mine. His eyes went blank, curiously dead as he turned away, and they were gone. We stood there, the others looking away from me as the tears streaked noiselessly down my face. The silent moment dragged on, and then Esme's phone vibrated in her hand. It flashed to her ear. She said, "Now." Rosalie stalked out the front door without another glance in my direction, but Esme touched my cheek as she passed. Her whisper, "Be safe," lingered behind them as they slipped out the door. I heard my truck start thunderously, and then fade away. Jasper and Alice waited. Alice's phone seemed to be at her ear before it even buzzed. She said Edward had confirmed the woman was on Esme's trail, and that she would get the car. She vanished into the shadows the way Edward had gone. Jasper and I looked at each other. He stood across the length of the entryway from me, being careful. He said quietly that I was wrong. "You know," I gasped, asking what he meant. He said he could feel what I was feeling now, and that I was worth it. I mumbled that I wasn't, and if anything happened to them, it would be for nothing. He repeated, smiling kindly at me, that I was wrong. I heard nothing. But then Alice stepped through the front door and came toward me with her arms held out. She asked if she might lift me. I smiled wryly, saying she was the first one to ask permission. She lifted me in her slender arms, as easily as Emmett had, shielding me protectively, and then we flew out the door, leaving the lights bright behind us.